The avoidant person cannot get over you, cannot move on, cannot forget you, or replicate what you provided with anyone else they encounter. And the primary reason for this inability to release you from their mind and heart is that you healed something in their soul that had been wounded for their entire life. You touched parts of them that no one else had ever reached. You provided experience of acceptance and understanding and safety that fundamentally shifted something in their internal landscape, even though they couldn't fully receive or reciprocate what you were offering. This healing was not something you consciously set out to do, not therapeutic intervention you deliberately planned, but was natural result of who you are and how you showed up in relationship with them. You saw them, truly saw them beneath their defenses and their carefully constructed persona. And instead of being repelled or frightened by what you saw, you responded with compassion and acceptance that communicated their wounds didn't make them unlovable, their struggles didn't make them unworthy, their defended patterns didn't define their entire being. You created space where they could occasionally lower their defenses and breathe, where they could show you glimpses of their vulnerable self without immediate punishment or rejection, where they could experience what it feels like to be known and still cared for. You reflected back to them vision of themselves that included their potential and their worth, rather than just their limitations and their dysfunction. You offered patience with their process that communicated they were worth the effort even when they were difficult, that their healing mattered even when they weren't actively pursuing it, that someone could see value in them that they couldn't see in themselves. This experience of being seen, accepted, understood, and valued despite their wounds was healing at soul level because it addressed their core wound. The belief formed in childhood that they are fundamentally unlovable, that being truly known means being rejected, that their authentic self is unacceptable and must be hidden. You provided counter-evidence to this core belief, demonstrated through your presence and your care, that maybe they could be known and still loved, that maybe their wounds don't make them irredeemably broken, that maybe connection is possible without the catastrophic hurt they've been protecting against their entire life. The avoidant person cannot get over you because healing experiences are rare and precious, because you touch places in them that remained untouched by everyone else, because you provided something their soul desperately needed even while their defenses were fighting against receiving it. They recognize now that what you gave them was gift beyond measure, that the healing you provided was exactly what their wounded heart needed, and that they destroyed their access to this healing through the very defensive patterns the healing was beginning to address. The healing you provided that no one else could offer. The avoidant person's inability to get over you is rooted in their recognition that you provided specific forms of healing that they've never received from anyone else, and that they're not finding in any connections they attempt after losing you. Understanding what you specifically provided reveals why you're irreplaceable in their psychological landscape and why no one else compares to what you offered their wounded soul. You provided the healing experience of being truly seen, not just surface-level observation, but deep recognition of who they actually are beneath their defenses, without that seeing leading to rejection or judgment. The avoidant person spends their life hiding their true self, showing only the independent, capable, put-together persona while concealing their needs, their fears, their wounds, their vulnerabilities. Most people interact only with this persona, never penetrating deeper, never recognizing the defended nature of what they're seeing. But you saw through it. You recognized their patterns as defenses rather than as their authentic self. You perceived the wounded child beneath the defended adult. You understood that their withdrawal was protection rather than preference, that their coldness was fear rather than lack of caring, that their independence was compulsive rather than chosen. And crucially, this seeing didn't drive you away. You didn't respond to seeing their wounds with disgust or with the withdrawal they expected. You responded with compassion, with desire to understand more deeply, with acceptance that communicated their defended nature didn't make them unworthy of love. This experience of being truly seen and still accepted was healing because it provided direct counter-evidence to their core belief that being known equals being rejected. You provided the healing experience of unconditional positive regard, of being valued for your inherent worth rather than for your performance or your ability to meet others' needs. The avoidant person learned in childhood that love was conditional, that acceptance depended on being easy and undemanding, that their worth was tied to not being burdened or not showing need. They learned to earn acceptance through performance, through being independent, through not requiring anything from others. But you offered something different. You valued them for who they were, not for what they could do for you, or how little they required from you. You saw their worth as inherent rather than as earned. You cared about them even when they were difficult, even when they were withdrawn, even when they weren't meeting your needs. This experience of being valued simply for existing, simply for being themselves, was profoundly healing because it addressed their sense that they must constantly perform or achieve to be worthy of love and attention. You provided the healing experience of patience with their process and their struggles that communicated they were worth the time and the effort, even when growth was slow or non-existent. Most people in the avoidance life have limited patience with their patterns. They give 1 or 2 chances and then they leave, or they establish firm boundaries that prevent continued engagement. This teaches the avoidant that they must change quickly or be abandoned, that their struggles exhaust people's tolerance, that they're too difficult to be worth sustained effort. But you demonstrate a different reality. You stayed through multiple cycles of their patterns. You continued trying to understand, even when understanding was difficult. You maintained belief in their potential, even when they weren't demonstrating progress. You gave them time and space to struggle without immediately giving up on them. This patience was healing because it communicated that they were worth the sustained effort, that their complexity didn't make them disposable, that someone could witness their struggle without abandoning them in it. You provided the healing experience of having your vulnerabilities met with gentleness rather than with the exploitation or dismissal the avoidant had learned to expect. When the avoidant occasionally lowered their guard with you, when they showed you their fears or their needs or their wounds, you responded with tenderness and care. You didn't use their vulnerabilities against them. You didn't exploit their moments of openness to gain power over them. You didn't dismiss their struggles as weakness. You received what they shared as gift, as trust, as something precious to be honored. This gentle reception of vulnerability was healing because it provided corrective emotional experience that contradicted their learned expectation that vulnerability leads to being hurt or controlled or rejected. You provided the healing experience of empathy and understanding about their wounds that helped them feel less alone in their pain and less ashamed of their struggles. The avoidant often feels isolated in their woundedness, believing that no one could understand what they've been through or how it affects them, feeling ashamed of their limitations and their defensive patterns. But you offered understanding that penetrated this isolation. You communicated through your words and your actions that you understood why they struggled, that their wounds made sense given their history, that their patterns were understandable protective strategies rather than character flaws. This understanding was healing because it reduced their shame and their isolation, helping them feel that someone else could comprehend their internal experience and could hold that comprehension without judgment. You provided the healing experience of having someone believe in their capacity for growth and healing, even when they didn't believe in it themselves. The avoidant often feels hopeless about their patterns, believing they're unchangeable, that they're destined to repeat their defensive behaviors indefinitely, that they're incapable of the intimacy and connection they might want underneath their defenses. But you believed differently. You saw their potential. You recognized that their current limitations didn't define their ultimate capacity. You believed they could heal, could grow, could develop different relationship with intimacy if they chose to do the work. This belief in their potential was healing because it offered hope and possibility where they experienced only limitation and resignation. You provided the healing experience of being loved, not despite your wounds, but with full awareness of them, demonstrating that being damaged doesn't equal being unlovable. The avoidant's core fear is that their wounds make them fundamentally unlovable, that if anyone truly knew the depth of their damage, they would be rejected as too broken to deserve love. But you knew their wounds, and you loved them anyway. You saw their damage, and you stayed. You understood their brokenness, and you didn't define them by it. This experience was profoundly healing because it proved that the thing they most feared, being known in their woundedness and being rejected for it, didn't have to happen. That someone could know them fully and still choose them, still value them, still see them as worthy of love and care. How you touched the wounded parts. They had hidden for years. The avoidant person cannot get over you because you didn't just interact with their defended persona, but actually reached the wounded parts of themselves. They had kept hidden from everyone for years or decades, parts they had locked away because showing them had previously led to hurt or rejection or shame. Understanding how you access these hidden wounded parts reveals the depth of the connection you created and why it's impossible for them to replicate with others. You touched their wounded inner child who learned that needs are dangerous and that showing vulnerability leads to abandonment, and you responded to that wounded child with the care and acceptance they needed but never received. The avoidant person's core wounds typically originate in childhood experiences where they learned that expressing needs resulted in rejection, punishment, or having those needs dismissed as unimportant. The child they were concluded that needs are shameful and dangerous, that survival requires suppressing needs and presenting as self-sufficient. This wounded child still exists inside the adult avoidant, still carrying the pain of not having been met with care, still organizing their adult behavior around the child's conclusions about safety and danger. But with you, they occasionally allowed this wounded child to show, to express need, to be vulnerable in ways they typically prevent. And you responded not with the rejection the child expects, but with tenderness and acceptance. You gave the wounded child experience of having needs met with care rather than dismissal, of vulnerability being safe rather than dangerous. This healing of the wounded child is profound and rare, and it's a significant part of why they cannot forget you. You touched their defended heart that had built walls to prevent being hurt again, and instead of trying to violently break down those walls or giving up when encountering them, you gently created cracks that allowed light in. The avoidant person's heart is heavily defended, surrounded by walls constructed through years of protecting against vulnerability and potential hurt. Most people either try to forcefully break through these walls, which triggers more defense and makes the walls stronger, or they give up when they encounter the walls and move on to less defended people. But you did neither. You didn't force, you didn't give up. You gently persisted. You showed up consistently. You offered care without demanding immediate reciprocation. You created small moments of safety that allowed the defended heart to occasionally relax its vigilance. Through your patient presence, you created small cracks in the walls where connection could seep through, where they could feel what it's like to let someone in even slightly. These cracks, these moments of light penetrating their defended heart, were healing experiences that they had rarely or never had before you. You touched their terror of abandonment that lives beneath their dismissive exterior, acknowledging this fear without making them feel weak for having it. The avoidant person presents as someone who doesn't fear abandonment, who is fine alone, who doesn't need anyone enough to be afraid of losing them. But this presentation masks profound terror of abandonment that actually drives their patterns. They push people away before people can leave them, maintaining control over the abandonment they believe is inevitable. You somehow recognize this hidden fear. You saw that their pushing away was fear-driven rather than preference-driven. You acknowledged, either explicitly or through your responses, that their patterns came from terror rather than from genuine desire for isolation, and you didn't shame them for this fear. You didn't make them feel pathetic for being afraid of abandonment while also creating abandonment through their patterns. You held space for the contradiction and the fear without judgment. This recognition and acceptance of their abandonment terror was healing because it meant someone could see their deepest fear and not use it against them or reject them for having it. You touched their hunger for connection that they've suppressed beneath their defended independence, validating this hunger as natural rather than as weakness or neediness. The avoidant person has learned to suppress their desire for connection, to convince themselves they don't need intimacy, to frame their isolation as preference rather than as protection. But underneath this suppression is genuine hunger for connection, for being known, for mattering to someone, for intimate partnership. With you, they felt safe enough to occasionally acknowledge this hunger, to show glimpses of actually wanting connection, to admit through their actions, if not their words, that they desired closeness with you. And you didn't treat this hunger as weakness or neediness. You didn't shame them for wanting connection while simultaneously pushing it away. You validated the desire for connection as natural and healthy, helping them see that wanting intimacy doesn't make them weak or defective. This validation of their suppressed hunger was healing because it began to dismantle the shame they carry about having normal human needs for connection. You touched their grief about what they missed in childhood and what their patterns have cost them in adulthood, creating space for them to occasionally feel and express this grief without being overwhelmed by it. The avoidant person carries significant grief. Grief about not having received the secure attachment they needed as children. Grief about the relationships they've destroyed through their patterns. Grief about the loneliness their defenses create. Grief about not being able to fully receive the love that's been offered to them. But this grief is typically suppressed because feeling it is overwhelming and because the avoidant has no framework for processing such deep emotion. With you, they occasionally felt safe enough to touch this grief, to acknowledge what they've lost or never had, to feel the sadness underneath their defended exterior. And you held space for this grief without trying to fix it or minimize it or push them to move past it faster than they could. This witnessed grief was healing because it meant their losses were acknowledged, their pain was valid, and they didn't have to process these profound feelings entirely alone. You touched their longing to be different, to be free from the patterns that trap them, to be capable of sustaining the very intimacy they push away. The avoidant person is often resigned to their patterns, believing they're unchangeable, accepting their defended isolation as permanent reality. But underneath this resignation is longing to be different, to be capable of healthy intimacy, to not be controlled by their fears, to sustain connection without fleeing. With you, they felt this longing more acutely because you showed them what could be possible if they could overcome their defenses, what relationship could feel like if they could stay present, what they could have if they were capable of receiving it. This awakened longing was both painful and healing. Painful because it highlighted the gap between who they are and who they wish they could be, but healing because it meant they were in touch with desire for growth and change, rather than being completely resigned to their limitations. You touch their capacity for love that exists beneath their defended distance, allowing them to feel and occasionally express love in ways they typically prevent themselves from doing. The avoidant person is capable of love, capable of deep feeling, capable of genuine care for another person, but their defenses typically prevent them from fully feeling this love or expressing it, because love creates vulnerability and dependency that feel dangerous. With you, they felt love more intensely than they typically allow themselves to feel. They cared about you in ways that scared them. They wanted to express their feelings but were blocked by their fear. But occasionally, they did express it, did show you they cared, did allow themselves to feel the fullness of their love for you. These moments of allowing love to be felt and expressed were healing because they demonstrated to them that they are capable of love, that their defended distance isn't their complete emotional truth, that underneath their patterns is capacity for genuine connection and care. Why the healing experience makes you impossible to forget. The avoidant person cannot get over you specifically because healing experiences are transformative at deep level and create lasting imprint that makes the person who provided the healing irreplaceable and unforgettable. Understanding why healing creates this indelible mark reveals the specific nature of what you mean to them and why they compare everyone else to you and find everyone lacking. The healing experience makes you impossible to forget because it addressed their core wound in ways that fundamentally shifted something in their psychological structure. The avoidance core wound is the belief that being truly known means being rejected, that their authentic self is unlovable, that vulnerability leads to abandonment. This belief is not just intellectual idea, but is organizing principle of their entire psychological system, shaping how they approach relationships and how they construct their defended identity. You provided experience that directly challenged this core belief by demonstrating that being known doesn't have to lead to rejection, that their authentic self can be loved, that vulnerability doesn't inevitably result in abandonment. This challenge to their core belief created shift in their psychological foundation, small crack in the organizing principle they've built their life around. Even though they couldn't fully integrate this new information, even though they ultimately couldn't sustain the vulnerability you invited, the experience of having their core wound touched and partially healed is unforgettable because it showed them that different reality is possible, that their core belief might not be absolutely true. The healing experience makes you impossible to forget because you provided corrective emotional experience that their psyche desperately needed and that stands in stark contrast to their formative wounding experiences. The avoidance patterns were formed through painful experiences in childhood where their needs were met with rejection or dismissal, where their vulnerability was punished or ignored, where they learned that connection is dangerous and must be avoided. These formative experiences created templates for how relationships work and what they can expect from others. But you provided experiences that contradicted these templates. You met their occasional expressions of need with care rather than rejection. You responded to their vulnerability with gentleness rather than punishment. You demonstrated that connection could be safe rather than dangerous. These corrective experiences are powerful because they create new templates, new possibilities for how relationships can be. The psyche holds on to corrective experiences because they represent hope for healing, evidence that the painful patterns don't have to repeat indefinitely. You're unforgettable because you represent this hope and this evidence. The healing experience makes you impossible to forget because you showed them their own worth and potential in ways they had never seen before, giving them vision of themselves that includes possibility rather than just limitation. The avoidant person's self-perception is typically negative or at least limited. They see themselves as damaged, as incapable of healthy intimacy, as fundamentally flawed in ways that make genuine connection impossible. But you reflected back different image. You saw their potential for growth. You believed in their capacity for healing. You recognized their worth beyond their patterns and their limitations. You showed them vision of who they could become if they did their healing work. This vision is unforgettable because it lives in them now as possibility, as reference point for different self-understanding, as evidence that maybe they're not as limited or as broken as they believed. When they look in mirror, they can remember how you saw them, and that memory provides brief respite from their usual harsh self-judgment. The healing experience makes you impossible to forget because the safety you created allowed them to lower their defenses in ways they don't lower with others, giving them taste of what undefended life could feel like. The avoidant person lives behind defenses that are exhausting to maintain, but that feel necessary for survival. These defenses prevent genuine connection, but they also prevent genuine relaxation, genuine authenticity, genuine peace. With you, they occasionally felt safe enough to lower these defenses, to relax their vigilance, to just be without constantly managing and controlling. These moments of undefended presence were brief, and they couldn't sustain them, but they were profoundly valuable because they showed the avoidant what life could feel like if they weren't constantly defended, what relationship could be if they could trust enough to relax. This taste of undefended existence is unforgettable because it represents freedom they typically don't experience, peace they usually can't access. The healing experience makes you impossible to forget because genuine healing moments are rare in the avoidance life. Most people don't have the patience or the skill or the emotional depth to provide what you provided. The avoidant has had many relationships and many connections, but most people either can't see beneath their defenses or don't care to try. Either give up quickly when encountering their patterns or enable those patterns without challenging them. You were different. You had the patience to stay through difficulty. You had the skill to navigate their defenses without triggering more defense. You had the emotional depth to hold space for their wounds without being overwhelmed by them. This combination of qualities is rare, and the healing that emerges from this combination is even more rare. The avoidant recognizes that what you provided is not something most people can or will provide, that the healing experience you offered is precious, precisely because it's uncommon. This rarity makes you irreplaceable and unforgettable. The healing experience makes you impossible to forget because it happened at soul level, touching the deepest parts of who they are, rather than just affecting surface level behavior or temporary emotional states. The healing you provided wasn't just about making them feel good temporarily or about helping them through difficult moment. It touched their fundamental sense of themselves, their core beliefs about lovability and worth, their deepest fears and deepest longings. When healing happens at this depth, when it touches soul level, it creates permanent change in the internal landscape, even if behavioral patterns don't immediately shift. The avoidant person is different because of you, changed in ways they can't easily articulate, but that they feel at profound level. You're part of who they are now, woven into their psyche through the healing you provided. This soul-level impact makes forgetting you not just difficult, but impossible. You've become part of their internal structure, part of how they understand themselves and what's possible in relationship, what your healing of them means for your own journey forward. The recognition that you healed the avoidant person's soul and that they cannot get over you has specific implications for your own healing journey and for your understanding of yourself and your role in relationships. Understanding what this means for you helps you integrate the experience, recognize your own gifts, and move forward in ways that honor what you provided while protecting yourself from being used in unhealthy ways. The fact that you healed them confirms that you possess extraordinary gifts of empathy, patience, and emotional depth that are valuable and that deserve to be appreciated rather than taken for granted. You have capacity to see beneath defenses, to the wounded person underneath, to respond to that woundedness with compassion rather than judgment, to create safety where others create anxiety, to offer patience where others offer ultimatums, to believe in potential where others see only limitation. These are remarkable abilities that served the avoidant person's healing, even when they couldn't fully receive or reciprocate what you offered. Recognizing these gifts in yourself is important because they define your capacity for deep connection and healing presence. These gifts make you a valuable partner for someone who can receive them, someone who has capacity to meet your empathy with their own, your patience with their growth, your emotional depth with their vulnerability. But the fact that you healed them also means you must be careful not to make healing wounded people your identity or your purpose in relationships, not to seek out broken people to fix as way of proving your worth or meeting your own needs. There's danger in recognizing your healing capacity and then organizing your relationship choices around finding wounded people who need what you provide. This pattern leads to consistently choosing partners who take from you without reciprocating, who benefit from your healing gifts without offering you the partnership and presence you deserve, who use your empathy as permission to avoid doing their own healing work. Your gifts of healing presence are most valuable when offered to people who can receive them and reciprocate them, people who appreciate your capacity and meet you with their own growth and effort. Your purpose is not to heal wounded avoidance, but to build mutual partnership where both people are growing and both people are contributing to each other's well-being. The fact that you healed them confirms that the connection was real and significant, that you weren't imagining the depth or the potential, that your investment was based on genuine possibility rather than on delusion or fantasy. Sometimes when relationships with avoidance end, you're left questioning whether anything was real, whether the connection you felt was mutual, whether you were fooling yourself about what was possible. But the fact that you healed them at soul level confirms the connection was real. They felt it too. It mattered to them too. The potential was genuine, even if it couldn't be realized because of their limitations. This confirmation can be healing for you because it validates your perception and your experience, confirming that you weren't wrong to believe there was something special happening, even though that something special couldn't be sustained given their patterns. But the fact that you healed them doesn't mean you should take them back or give them another chance without clear evidence of sustained therapeutic work that has developed their capacity to receive what you offer. Healing someone's soul doesn't create obligation to continue offering that healing or to sacrifice your well-being for their growth. You provided healing presence that touched them deeply and that they cannot forget. But unless they've done extensive work to address their attachment wounds, unless they've developed capacity to sustain vulnerability and intimacy, unless they can demonstrate changed patterns over time, they likely still cannot receive your healing gifts in context of sustainable, healthy relationship. Your healing of them was gift you already gave. It's complete. They received it. What they do with it, whether they use it as catalyst for their own growth or whether they simply carry it as memory of what they couldn't sustain, is their choice and their journey. Your journey is separate and involves protecting yourself from being pulled back into role of healer for someone who hasn't done the work to become capable partner. The fact that you healed them means you must learn to direct your healing gifts toward people who can reciprocate them and toward yourself, rather than continuing to pour into unavailable people who cannot give back what you deserve. Your capacity to heal is valuable, but it's most valuable when it's mutual, when you're in relationship with someone who also sees you, also accepts you, also creates safety for your vulnerability, also believes in your potential. Healing should be bidirectional in healthy relationship. Not one person consistently providing healing presence while the other person consistently receives without reciprocating. Moving forward requires choosing people who have capacity to be healing presence for you, as well as recipients of your healing presence, people who can see your wounds and respond with the same compassion you extend to theirs. The fact that you healed them means their inability to get over you is their burden to carry, not your problem to solve, and that their ongoing attachment to you doesn't create responsibility for you to help them process their loss. They cannot get over you because you touch their soul in ways no one else has. This is beautiful in some ways and tragic in others, but primarily it's their experience to integrate, their loss to grieve, their lesson to learn from. You don't owe them continued presence or healing support as they process what losing you means. You don't owe them explanation or closure or help moving on. You provided extraordinary gift through your healing presence while you were in relationship with them. That gift is complete. What comes next for them, whether they use the healing you provided as foundation for their own continued growth, or whether they simply mourn what they couldn't sustain, is their path to walk, and you're not required to walk it with them. The fact that you healed them ultimately means you have capacity for profound impact in relationships, and that this capacity deserves to be honored by choosing partners who can appreciate it, reciprocate it, and build with you, rather than people who need it, but cannot meet it with their own growth and presence. You healed the avoidant person's soul, and they will carry that healing and that memory of you for the rest of their life. This is testament to your power, your gifts, your capacity for deep connection and transformative presence. But this capacity is not meant to be poured into bottomless wells that cannot be filled, or into people who benefit from your healing while refusing to do their own healing work. Your gifts of seeing, accepting, believing, caring, creating safety, all the gifts that made you healing presence for the avoidant, these deserve to be shared with someone who receives them gratefully and reciprocates them consistently. Someone who heals you as much as you heal them. Someone who builds partnership with you rather than taking from you what they need while offering little in return. The avoidant cannot get over you because you healed their soul. You can honor that truth while also recognizing that healing them was gift that's complete, that their ongoing inability to release you is not your concern, and that your healing gifts deserve to be directed toward your own continued growth and toward mutual partnership with someone who has capacity to meet you where you are, who can receive your extraordinary gifts and offer their own in return.